Welcome to It Depends, a sales tax podcast by TaxConnex. I'm your host, Brian Greer. Sales and use tax can be confusing and very overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Whether you work in industry or at a CPA firm, or just someone who wants to stay informed about the latest sales tax laws, we've got you covered. Periodically, we'll explore different aspects of sales tax. So whether you're a tax pro or a novice, tune in and join us as we attempt to simplify the complexity of the sales tax world. This is It Depends, because with sales tax, there's rarely just one answer, and often that's our answer to many questions. It just depends.
I am one of the partners here at TaxConnex, and I've been in this sales and telecom tax industry for a little bit over 25 years now, which starts to become frightening the longer it goes. At one point, I thought 15 years was a long time, but now 25, 26 years is really a long time. If you're not familiar with TaxConnex, I'll give you just kind of a brief background on the organization, really just kind of highlight what we do. There's really two main practices in our business. One is our consulting and advisory service. So a lot of times companies come to us and they don't really know exactly what they're supposed to be doing from a sales or telecom tax perspective. And we really help them kind of sort through, what are their requirements, what risk or exposure might they have historically, how can they get that exposure cleaned up and get into compliance. So that's one portion of our business. And the other practice area is a compliance outsourcing service, where we essentially become an outsourced sales tax or telecom tax resource for our clients, mainly focused on preparing and filing returns and remitting the tax payments to the jurisdictions. So, Eric, I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself and Tax, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, sure. So I'm with Tax. I've been here about 2.5 years, doing a variety of different things. And previously, I was at Deloitte, level 3, which got acquired by CenturyLink. It's now Lumen, and at Twilio. And along the way, I've been doing a mixture of telecom tax and tax technology and everything in between those, and all the other indirect taxes that go with it. So, I'm hoping to add some value here for you, help you.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. So when we first started talking about this topic for the discussion today, I thought it was pretty intriguing because there's so much hype in not just our industry, but the world in general around AI and automation. And, there are a lot of companies, and now specifically, in the sales and telecom tax space, a lot of companies that are really promoting these AI models and full automation of the sales and telecom tax process. So there's kind of this connotation in the market that's floating around that, these new tools, and quite frankly, a lot of these tools aren't so new, and Eric will talk about that here in just a bit. But a lot of these new tools and AI is going to, kind of save the day and solve all of our problems related to sales and telecom tax. And I mentioned, previously that I've been in this industry for about 25, 26 years now. And, I've been looking for, and everybody's been looking for the easy button in this industry since before I got into the industry. And I can tell you in the 25 years I've been in the industry, it's gotten more complex and more chaotic than it was previously. And hopefully I'm not going to burst anyone's bubble, but I'm going to tell you that, AI, automation, cool, great, they have their place, but they're not a silver bullet either. So we're going to kind of talk through, what AI is versus automation. Again, there's some of what's really being hyped today has been around for a long, long time. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what I describe as the three C's of compliance. And if you listen to the introduction of myself and Eric, our businesses, I mentioned that I focus in the consulting area. Eric focuses on the calculation. That's kind of the second C. And then again, TaxConnex focuses on that third C of compliance. So we'll talk through those different areas of tax compliance and where we've seen automation and AI work and not work. And then we'll kind of wrap up with some, hopefully some thought-provoking questions if you are looking at, considering working with a company in this space, just some ideas and thoughts as you evaluate different companies. So with that as the background, Eric, I'll let you take this first slide here about automation and AI.
Yeah, so we wanted to start with this because automation and AI are both marketing buzzwords right now. They're everywhere. Everyone's offering one or both or some combination. And so we want to try to distinguish a bit. Typically, when people talk about AI today, they're talking about generative AI, the one that's making the news, right? Chatbots, the LLMs, and now becoming more and more multimodal, meaning that they can process video, pictures, all sorts of different modes of media, right? So I asked a generative AI model to give me an example of the simplest form of AI. And what it came back with was your home thermostat, which, it's really a sort of a rules-based workflow. It's something that most of us would think of as automation, but not necessarily AI. And that's kind of where we want to try to figure out, what do people mean when they use these terms? The thermostat is sensing. It has a sensor measuring the temperature, and then it takes action based on that reading, right? Very simple AI. But that's typically not what people mean when they use that term today. So that would be something that I think we'd call automation. And I have a few other examples down here. We've got that like chatbots are the typical generative AI, the text-based LLM, whereas the rules-based workflow is something that's probably going to be thought of as more in automation. And they both have their strengths. And we want to make sure that we talk through this presentation about where each fit into the whole indirect tax compliance process, and what to watch out for on each. You don't want to use the wrong tool, and because there could be risks associated with that. Agents are the last thing that I think is worth talking about, because that is sort of where generative AI is heading now. And when for agents, what you want to imagine is these are where generative AI comes up with a solution for you, but it also has the keys to other software to go and take those actions that it's recommending, right? That's where the agent component comes in. And we obviously want to be very careful with that. Handing over the keys to AI can introduce a lot of risk. And one of the things we're going to emphasize throughout this presentation is keeping a human in the loop. We want to make sure that anywhere that there's an action that needs to be taken that can't be undone, you have a human reviewing that before you send it along. You can move on.
Yeah, Eric. Yeah, I think that's a good background in what we're just discussing here. I mentioned these three C's here. I'm not going to spend any additional time on this specific screen, but let's look at this from a consulting perspective. And I think there's usually a couple of main questions that people have, and those questions are really, what are my requirements and what should I do? Now, obviously, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of sub-questions to that, but generally speaking, companies are just trying to figure out, what are the requirements and what should I do, both retroactively as well as prospectively. And what I've seen from whether it's, you could probably describe it as AI. As an example, we utilize a tax research tool called Checkpoint by Thomson Reuters. A lot of the major tax publishing types of companies have similar tools. But the Checkpoint product has a co-pilot that allows you to, ask questions and, get responses back. And, a lot of times those questions are, as an example, I'm a SaaS software provider in the state of Texas. Am I supposed to charge sales tax? And it'll come back and say, yep, supposed to charge sales tax. Unique rule in Texas, though, only 80% of the charge is subject to sales tax in the state of Texas. Great, perfect. I think that type of question, that type of statement works well. However, where, Eric mentioned the human in the loop aspect of this and where it becomes a little bit more nuanced, you have to answer that question about, what should I do? But even before that, the question is, do you really provide SaaS? And it sounds kind of odd, but I've had numerous conversations that start with a business and they come in and they say, hey, we're a SaaS provider. We're looking for help. We need to figure out, what are our requirements? What am I supposed to do? And you really start asking some questions. Well, tell me about the software. What does it do? If I'm a user, how do I interact with it? What information do I feed into it? What do I get back? There's a lot of these types of nuances that starts to identify really what that product is. And sometimes you find that product is really an information service, or maybe it's considered data processing and it's not SaaS. So now, you've asked the question to the AI tool, is SaaS taxable? Let's assume you've gotten the right response, yes, in Texas at 80% of the charge. But the reality is you don't sell SaaS and you've got the wrong answer now. So, that's where the caution comes in to make sure that you're, in this case, asking the right question, getting the right information back. And, even at that point, it's, okay, now that I know that it's taxable, what should I do? What's the next step? And now you start looking at, well, what's the level of exposure that I have? Is it $1,000? Is it $50,000? Is it $100,000? Do I have an exit planned in the next 1 to 3 years that's going to require some type of due diligence that somebody's going to find this issue and therefore I want to remediate it proactively? Or maybe I'm okay just carrying a little bit of risk in the business and not doing anything retroactively and just managing this on a go-forward perspective basis. So that's the human in the loop aspect of it, and just providing that real guidance from a expertise perspective. Another example, and I was talking with Dana and Eric about this right before we started. It was super timely because I was on LinkedIn just before this discussion, and one of our competitors is hyping their AI solution. And one of the advantages that it talked about was the ability to automatically register you in states overnight without you knowing it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never want that to happen. What are the income tax implications of doing this? Maybe I technically have reached Nexus because of transaction counts, and therefore I should register, but the level of tax is immaterial, and I don't want to do a registration. I just want to monitor it. It's kind of frightening to, see this AI hype and this, I guess the connotation again that it's being taken care of, it's automated. You don't have to worry about it, but you got to have somebody really making that decision, in my opinion, as opposed to, yes, the letter of the law says you've reached Nexus, therefore you should register. We're going to auto-register that for you, and you don't have to think about it. But now maybe you've opened up a Pandora's box of other issues that you weren't prepared to take on. So I think that expertise, that human, really needs to take that information and make that nuanced decision and provide that nuanced guidance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the AI is generally going to guide you around letter of the law as much as possible, but it's going to ignore things like cost benefit analysis, which is sort of what Brian was getting at, where maybe technically you should register, but the risk is almost non-existent in some cases. If all of your sales to a certain state are not taxable, then what is the true exposure of not registering, even if economic nexus was triggered? So there's extra analysis that should be done so that you're not now creating an ongoing filing obligation that you can't undo. When we talk about automation, I mean, probably a lot of these things you've already seen as far as the benefits of automation. Automation's been happening for decades now. The main ones being the reduced labor costs and minimize errors, right? Any time we can take away manual data entry or transferring data from one place to another, we're reducing that opportunity for errors. Creating a very robust paper trail can help with both audit defense as well as troubleshooting issues. And all of that can be done well with automation. Also providing data for compliance purposes, right? Getting a variety of different reports so that you can report what you need on each different form so that you can reconcile to different systems like your ERP or billing system, providing that robust data, but also summarized in different ways that are helpful and having that done automatically. And then having the flexibility to alter any piece, any component along the way to get that customized output to feed your unique business needs. Right, and then incorporating that flexibility, those custom rules into your automated process. This is an overview of more or less how our Tax platform handles tax calculation process. And I want to emphasize that this is an automated process. We are not using generative AI, and there's a very good reason for that. Generative AI is fundamentally based on mathematical probabilities. It does some really incredible things. I'm sure we've all seen it generate some very good write-ups. But you can take the same prompt and put it in ChatGPT several times and you'll get a different answer every time because there is an element of probability. Now, ChatGPT also has ways that you can turn down the temperature to make it somewhat more accurate, but it's still a constantly evolving model. Sorry, not more accurate, I should say more consistent. But it's still a constantly evolving model. It would be dangerous to have a model like that handling every step of the tax compliance process, from determining the location of a transaction, the relevant tax jurisdictions that location falls within, then pulling whether or not that transaction is taxable, and then what is the appropriate rate to apply to that for every possible tax that could appear on there. Because of the element of probability, you may get different answers on that question for the same transaction, the same invoice over 1 month to the next, you may get a different answer even though nothing really changed. You may get a different answer for two identical customers buying the same product or service in the same month because there is fundamentally an element of randomness to it. So we want to make sure that we are, for a process that we want consistency, reliability, that we are using a strict rules-based workflow to produce that automation. Now, we can use generative AI to create enhancements around that process, but when it comes down to actually doing the calculation, we want that rigidity.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that's certainly, where when we start looking at this sales tax process from soup to nuts, the automation aspect of the tax calculation is critical, and it's the best application of the automation. I don't like these solutions that have the quote unquote auto file on the compliance side, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But leveraging the automation and the tax calc piece of it is where I always want to focus.
Yeah. So when it comes to managing our content, this is an area where we've certainly found a lot of use for AI and just processing large amounts of data, gathering data from around the internet, and then of course we review it. So that's the emphasis here, is that no matter how we use generative AI, we always include the human in the loop. We are reviewing anything that comes out of it. I've been speaking about AI since it came out a few years ago, and at the time I was introducing it as I was recommending everybody try it, but treat it as an intern or a team of interns, where you're sending out data that, or you're sending them a request and asking them to produce something for you, and you know that it's going to have errors. You need to check this thoroughly and do not just pass it along up the chain. It needs to be vetted. And that is still the case. I would say that it's probably not at the intern level anymore. It's maybe, 3 to 5 years experience. It's doing a pretty good job with whatever task you give it, but it's still likely to make errors from time to time. So we have a variety of ways that we are gathering content in terms of tax rates, but also taxability. So we have we keep a collection of different sources, websites, publications to monitor rate changes month to month. We also have a list of contacts with tax authorities, because sometimes rates change and it's not published anywhere. And so we just have to reach out to certain tax authorities from time to time and say, hey, what is the new rate? And that's just part of our ongoing process. And I don't see generative AI being able to replace something like that. There are situations where legislation, statutes, existing statutes and new bills, all of that is thoroughly published online. So AI can help with scanning those documents, trying to interpret things. Again, just needs to be vetted thoroughly, but there are areas where that can be leveraged effectively. Just keep that human in the loop. Same with regulations and proposed regulations, especially with proposed regulations. It can be, those can be proposed often and then they go nowhere, right? And so you don't want to invest a lot of human hours trying to anticipate every proposed regulation if they may not become anything. And so using generative AI to scan those sorts of documents and understand if there's anything, serious changes that need to be anticipated, and how closely that legislation needs to be tracked, or the proposed regulation. And then other publications, obviously bulletins, guides, things like that. So yeah, we're plugging generative AI into every step of this process, but we do want to make sure we keep that human loop to verify the accuracy before it goes into that strict rules-based workflow that we were talking about, because we want to make sure that the answer that comes out of there is accurate every time.
Yeah, and it sounds like, Eric, in terms of leveraging AI within the Sierra Tax framework, it's hopefully I'm saying this right, but it's more of a internally focused solution today to help facilitate the gathering and the maintenance of accurate content. It's not necessarily a customer-facing initiative. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's right. I think especially when it comes to generative AI, because of that probability aspect, we don't trust it to give our clients and customers definitively correct answers. There needs to be a level of caution there. And in our case, what we provide from a software aspect is we want that certainty. And so we don't want to allow AI to potentially muddy that yet. We use it to supplement the work that we do on the back end so that we can produce maintain our software more efficiently.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. One of the areas that you and I had talked about in preparation for this is kind of the tax mapping aspect of setting up a tax engine. And if the audience, if you've gone through a implementation of a tax engine, you probably know what we're referencing in terms of this tax mapping. Sometimes it has different terminology from company to company or person to person, but essentially what we're describing is the ability to match a SKU on the customer side to a tax code within the tax engine. And presuming that you get a one-to-one match of a SKU to a tax code, because the tax engine is now maintaining the tax applicability and the rates, then that tax calculation happens in an automated capacity, and it's accurate, it's correct. So we've seen some scenarios, and Eric, maybe you can talk about this first one, because I know you've done some, not necessarily ready to release as part of Tax, but personally, I think you've done some, created some models to facilitate the mapping of products. If you could maybe tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've developed something internally. We don't make it available to customers yet, but it's something we're considering on our roadmap here to sort of build it into our portal, but essentially a mapping solution that can just suggest some of our, what we call PS codes, our product service codes. That's how we categorize all products and everything that can be sold, right? And I developed a very basic AI that can propose some of those based on a description that's provided by the user. Now, it still has a lot of limitations, and it needs some fine tuning with prompts, but it is something where I see some value can be added there. Even if it's something like you just don't have much of a description, you have some combinations of letters or numbers that, the AI can go and find what that is, where a tax professional, we would typically throw that in Google, and we would have to do the research that way. The AI can do some of that lift for us, but there are still a lot of factors, which you mentioned on the other end, where you really need an expert to judge, is this even just one product? Because maybe it's more than one, and we need to split that apart. So that's where it does still run into some limitations there, and you want to make sure that at the end of the day, you have the documentation to support the tax policy that you are choosing, right? And that's where the professional comes in to make sure that these decisions are well supported and defensible on an audit.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into some of these bundled transactions that you were alluding to. And, if we've got anyone on the line that has a telecom background, and you start looking at how do you unbundle a transaction for FCC purposes, what you're going to have in telecom a lot, maybe you've got a wireless plan that has, voice, text, and data. All three of those are treated very differently from a tax and regulatory perspective. Similarly, if you are providing a VoIP service and maybe you have a VoIP seat that contains not only the voice service itself, but maybe there's a SaaS component with a soft phone that you can utilize. Maybe there are ancillary vertical features that, again, could have different tax or regulatory classifications and treatments. And what you can do, of course, from an unbundling perspective there is essentially allocate the amount of the charge that you want to fall into each one of those unique different product categories. Tax can certainly support that unbundling aspect of it, but there's no way in today's technology, maybe at some point in the future, but in today's technology and today's AI, to be able to look at those transactions, unbundle them appropriately, but then also allocate the correct amount of revenue to each one of those categories, because that can be a very business by business type of decision. There's not necessarily one way to allocate that revenue. So again, just kind of a word of caution. Eric also mentioned it. I alluded to it earlier as well in terms of, what is it that you're selling? Because you could have that description, and what Eric is describing, reading your description, identifying the appropriate PS code. If I write that description as this is a SaaS software that does X, Y, and Z, it's probably going to fool or trick the AI into thinking that that's SaaS because you're telling it that's what it is. But again, just a word of caution that that might not necessarily be what it is, even though that's what you say it is. All right, so let's take a look at this from a compliance perspective as well. So this is kind of the tail end here, where now we're preparing and filing tax returns. And this is where there's probably more industry hype around automation in this stage, and probably not as much hype from an AI perspective. But even from a automation perspective, there are challenges and issues that you have to be aware of. Some of those challenges and issues, as an example, I always talk about notice management, because if I've got some kind of automated technology sitting over here that's taking the data out of the tax engine, preparing a tax return and uploading that to a state, who is going to see a notice? There might be a notice posted in that e-file site. Believe it or not, this shocks me to the day. Jurisdictions love to send out paper notices. We get stacks and stacks and stacks every day of paper notices for our clients. Usually, they're more informational in nature, but sometimes there's something in there that needs to be acted upon. So these automated solutions don't really talk about that notice management aspect, and how do you know if a notice is posted? How do you know if there's some type of deficiency? And if there is, who's taking care of that for you? Now, as kind of a quick aside, and Eric, this is probably more on the quote unquote automation side, but something that we're doing today on an experimental basis, leveraging quote unquote AI, but again, I think it's really more on the automation side, is scanning those notices, reading them through some type of OCR technology, and picking out the key elements of those notices and logging that notice in our connection software, which is what we use to manage this entire process for clients, but automatically loading those critical data points, uploading that scanned PDF image, and based upon what it says, routing it to a specific individual for resolution. So it's something today that we've done fairly manually, but it's something that seems to be a pretty simple use case to automate / apply AI. I fall into the hype sometimes, Eric, and describe AI when it really isn't. But it's something that, you kind of referenced that you're using a lot of this technology to essentially make your product better. And we're doing the same thing on our side to leverage automation and leverage AI to improve the internal efficiencies of our process and but still, of course, having the dedicated people involved in the process.
Yeah, that's a great example. OCR in general that's a strength for modern generative AI, those multimodal solutions where they can take those images and they can pick off all the text for you and even match whatever structure it was presented in. They do a great job of that. And I mean, at the end of the day, you're using that to drive efficiency and then still sending it to a human to take the next action. And everyone sort of has these different levels of comfort as far as how much they're willing to hand the reins over to AI. But I do think I personally am probably more comfortable than most, but I still believe that those instances where you're about to submit a filing to a tax authority or take some action on a notice, any interaction with a tax authority, I do think it's worth having that set of eyes reviewing and validating that it looks correct before it's sent in, particularly on the registration thing. That I still can't believe you said people are using bots to register automatically. That could create quite the nightmare for them.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting. So you see some of the other scenarios here in terms of from a compliance perspective, just someone has to kind of keep up with those systems as well in terms of we've got a new product that we're rolling out and we need to map that into a new product category. Maybe there is some type of nexus trigger that goes off, but someone, in my opinion, needs to be making that decision to register and start filing. And also, something that we see a lot with these automated solutions is, what happens when you do have a question and you need some live support. Maybe it is just a notice that got mailed to you directly, and you're trying to reach out to your provider to get support on that, and you can't speak to anyone. It gets uploaded into some portal. You never hear from anyone, or maybe you get a link back with, some type of vague response. But how do you get live support? It's something that our combined businesses, SaraTax and TaxConnex, we both really focus on, having that live support and ability to reach an individual. So I'm going to kind of wrap up here and start talking about, I guess what we advertised as the main aspect of this presentation or discussion was really, how to choose the right provider. And hopefully by having this dialogue, we've given you some things to think about as you make that decision and as you talk to different providers. But just kind of summarizing a few of these topics, I would highly suggest be wary of that easy button. As I referenced before, 25 plus years, different governing boards, different governments have been trying to make this easy, and it's only become more complicated. Streamlined sales tax was in play over 25 years ago. And in my opinion, all it's done is it's created two different compliance systems. There's the states that are in the SST, and there are states that are not. So I just don't think there's an easy button here. And especially when you start looking at more complex businesses. And you might ask, well, what's a complex business? Maybe you're in a very simple business. Maybe you're a e-com business that sells 5 different items, and it's all done on one shopping cart, and you're in 10 states, maybe you're in 20 states, whatever the case may be. Honestly, that's a pretty simple use case. However, a lot of the businesses that Eric and I work with, they're in industries that are not as clear cut as that. Telecom, great example. It's one of the most complicated, most heavily taxed industries in the country, maybe the most heavily taxed industries in the country. So if you're in that world, I certainly would not be looking at a fully automated type of solution. I also think when you start looking at businesses that have multiple entities and multiple different taxing systems, multiple different billing solutions. I'm working with a client right now that has 6 different legal entities. Each one has its own billing system. There's 3 different tax engines involved. Yes, the dream is to consolidate and standardize all that on a single platform. Maybe that happens 10 years from now, but in the interim, they're probably going to acquire 5 more businesses with 5 more different systems. So you get these scenarios that are just very complex with multiple entities, multiple billing solutions, maybe even multiple tax engines. An automated solution isn't going to fix that. You're going to have a human leveraging technology, but applying their expertise to manage that for you. Another scenario, if you have frequent credits, this is something that's super challenging to manage. And what I'm describing here are scenarios where you make a sale here in the month of November, you invoice your client, you invoice them, including the tax. Next month, you remit that tax to the appropriate jurisdictions. 30 days later, your client short pays the bill, and they say, oops, I forgot to give you my exemption certificate. Here it is now. I'm not going to pay your sales tax. Or maybe they just return the order in its entirety, and now you got to issue this credit. So now you've got this sales tax credit sitting out there that you've already paid to the jurisdictions, and how do you get that back? So what automated solutions are going to do is they're going to wait for that exact, not the exact tax amount, but that they're going to look for an offsetting tax in the exact jurisdiction where that tax originated from, or where that tax first occurred. That's the right way to do it. But what happens if you don't have enough offsetting tax to absorb that credit? Eventually that's going to go out of statute, and you're going to lose the opportunity to pull that credit back. What I often describe in this scenario is I live in Canton, Georgia, and we have 2 zip codes, 30114 and 30115. And in this scenario, let's say the original purchase happened in 30114, and I've got that credit sitting there, but I never have another sale in that zip code. Well, why can't I just move that credit to 30115 where I've got an offsetting tax liability? Again, the state doesn't want you to do it, but it all goes to the same city. It all rolls up to the same place. So you can make that risk-based decision to absorb that credit in that scenario. And we've tried to do this automated. And when I say we've tried to do it at a previous company, we tried to do this, and it doesn't work well. You lose the audit trail. It becomes very convoluted. So if you're in that scenario, it's something you should definitely look at and consider how companies are going to manage that for you. And then we've referenced kind of throughout the discussion, just making sure that you've got access to people, and those people are actually applying their knowledge, to the process, to the tax engine, and it's not some kind of black box that you just don't really know what's happening. So
yeah, I think when you're evaluating any kind of vendor here, you really want to figure out if they're advertising automation or AI, what do they mean by that, right? How exactly are they plugging that into their process? And alongside that, what sort of risk are you comfortable with in terms of letting automation take over, right? And for me, when I can see a logical rules-based workflow, I know that it's going to hit the same decision every time, and I can take comfort in that as long as I can understand the process. But to Brian's point, as businesses get more complex, there are always exceptions to the rules, right? You can take your standard business process and you can lay it out nicely, and then you will run into exceptions every time. It's just how it goes. And the more complex it gets, the more exceptions you end up with as you're pulling things from different billing systems because of acquisitions and they haven't been fully integrated. It just creates extra layers of complexity. And that's where you need that human in the loop to see, okay, I have this rules-based workflow and here's the output, but now that I'm looking at it, something seems off. Now I need to make an adjustment and inject some of that flexibility, that custom rule into the process somewhere so that we still get the right answer and we have to reprocess it. If you don't have that human in the loop checking it at the end, that just gets sent off to the jurisdiction, and you may end up sending in a tax return with negative liability or something that, just it's not going to look right. So you want to make sure you have enough safeguards around that, but then even still having some sort of oversight to ensure that obvious errors aren't being sent along just because the robot, it wasn't as obvious to the robot, right?
Yeah, I think you kind of summarized this last slide pretty well there, Eric. All right, so thank you everybody for joining us.
This has been It Depends, with another episode explaining the complexities surrounding sales and use tax. We'll see you next time.